Welcome, accomplices. I'm Lynda Norman. I'm a watercolor artist in the beautiful province of British Columbia. Today I am going to play around with some Hake brushes and show you the difference between some different brands that I prefer, and we'll make one painting with one brush. Many years ago, when I first started painting, I ordered a brush online. I'm pretty sure that's where I got this one. And because I thought I would appreciate having a brush with a bit more real estate on the end, and just to try it out. I've been, starting off painting typically with the round brushes that everybody says you should paint with in watercolor, and I just wanted to experiment a bit more. I graduated into my Levinson 1.5 inch goat synthetic blend, which honestly was a game changer for me. But I still thought that I needed to try something that would cover more area. If you know me, you know I like to paint quickly and quite loosely. So when I stumbled across this brush, it was ideal. I was really pleased to have it. And it's a Ranson Hake brush, H-A-K-E, from ProArt. And I struggled for years to find another one because I knew this one was, not going to last me forever, and I did want to try more. But in the meantime, while I was waiting to find more of the Ranson from ProArt, I was purchasing other brushes, other Hake brushes. And yes, they're goat hair, they hold a ton of water, but the amount of water that they held wasn't as easy to control because the fibers were so soft. And that's, that has its merits, absolutely. But the way I paint, I liked something with a bit more, stiffness to the bristle. That way I felt I could control things a bit more. When these other brushes get wet, they become, you can see how the water the bristles are so soft that the water is actually bending the brush down. So for washes, getting the water on a page, great. For control, not so much, because they're just too flippy floppy, and that's not where I find the best results. So with my Hake brushes, I can be more specific, and I found that was for the way I paint, ideal. So these other ones are fun for, like I say, good coverage, especially if I'm doing a large painting, something like this, or even this one. Lots of water, lots of coverage, and a little easier to use for those things. However, I did find, I think it was from Jackson's Art from the UK, these ProArt brushes, and there's another one that's very soft. You can see I've used it, but it just didn't do what I needed it to do. So when I found these brushes, they came in a set. So these are my two old ones. They came in a set of 3, and yeah, they have different numbers on them here, but the numbers don't really tell me what those are. I'm guessing that's 1 inch and 1.5 inches. I'm not good at measurements, and maybe a 2 inch or 2.5 inch. But these are absolutely delightful. So they're let's see here, small, medium, and large. No measurements, but you can see they're labeled with, it says the Ranson Hake by ProArt. Ranson was an incredible watercolor artist, and even if you go on Facebook, there's a group of people who paint in the Ranson style. He had a particular style, a particular palette, and once you get to see his work and look at it, you'll be able to recognize it because of his particular style. And he used the Hake brushes in a beautiful way. And I think a lot of artists develop a style fairly quickly if they have the brushes that they come to know and appreciate, and the palette colors that they like to work with most, and that soon becomes recognizable, and that's always a fun thing to be able to know, is who's painting what by by recognizing what they've done. So let's make just a quick little landscape. I'm going to try all three of the hakes, just hakes. Some people say hake, some people say hake. I don't think it matters as long as we know what we're talking about. But you can see how, I mean, I could probably wet a much larger page than this. And there's still lots of water to spare. You can probably see that on there. So that's always a nice thing for a watercolor artist. And I'm just going to let that soak in for a moment. I'm going to show you what we're using today. We're using the Fluid 100 brand. It's a cold press finish, 100% cotton as always, acid free, 140 pound, 300 GSM. Some people get that confused. 300 pound is 640, I think, GSM. GSM is grams per square meter. And so that's a measurement that's used for shipping and manufacturing and all that stuff. Really, it's the 140 pound, I think, that we're more concerned with as artists. And this is a block, so it's glued on all four sides. This one has an opening, I think, sometimes it's at the top corner. Oh, well, yeah, that's the top. Sometimes it's at the top corner, sometimes it's in the middle. This one actually, I lied. This one actually is only glued on the top and the bottom, which is another variation of a block. But even so, it's going to keep the paper relatively flat. 100% cotton paper absorbs water. It's going to swell, the cells of the paper are going to absorb that water and they're going to expand, and that's what causes this kind of dipsy-doodling happening on the surface of the page. But it's important to have that moisture in your page. As I mentioned before, some people like to wet the back of their page and then wet it again and then adhere it to a nice smooth surface. That's great. Gives you lots of working time because you can keep that page pretty moist by doing that. And then they will wet the top surface as well before they get ready to paint. Now, one thing about Hake brushes, as with a lot of brushes, is they will lose a bit of hair as we go along. These are stitched, okay? Whereas some of the other brushes that we use are, they're glued in with some magical glue and not as likely to lose hairs, but they still do. But the Hake brushes are stitched to hold those lovely bristles in. I'm guessing it looks to me like they've been glued at the top surface there and then clamped between and stitched. But yeah, they will lose hairs. It is the way. So that water is soaking in quite nicely. I'm going to set that brush aside now. My paints have been wetted. They're nice and juicy. This is my personal grouping of colors that I love to use. And this, by the way, is my own palette. I designed this palette and I had it 3D printed by a lovely young fellow locally who took my design. I sent him a sketch and he does it up on his 3D printer. I love that I can use big wells. I can use my big brushes. Even if I decided to use the 2.5 inch or whatever this one is, I can get it into those wells and pick up the color that I want. So I think, I'm going to use that one. Same as this one, just an older one, and this one I'll save just for water because it's so nice and pretty and clean still. This one has been used, and so it's got color on it. So I'm going to, let's take a look here. I want to put a bit of yellow in my sky, but I don't want very much. So I'm going to dip in my color, take some of it off in the palette, and I'm just barely touching the surface. I just want to introduce this color very gently. If I was to press harder, if I had an uneven amount of pigment on my brush, probably would leave some darker marks. And yep, we've got some brush hairs here. All right. And then I'm going to do the same thing with Mayan Dark Blue and French Ultramarine. So in my palette, I've got Mayan Dark Blue, my absolute favorite blue of all time, a little bit of French Ultramarine, which is nice to mix to lighten things up in the blue side of things. Undersea Green, Quinacridone Gold, Quinacridone Rose, and here I've got a Burnt Umber, I can hardly remember, and then a bit of buff titanium in there just to soften things out sometimes. So while things are still wet, I've got a bit of Mayan Blue in that part of the palette. I'm going to just touch into my ultramarine just to lighten that up a tiny bit. And again, really light on the surface. I'm going to go right over top of some of that yellow. Quinacridone Gold, pardon me. And just a bit more. I think I want to add just a tiny bit more water. It just helps to move things along the page a little bit. Once you get to feel the amount of water that you need to create your painting, you'll know what that is like. For me, the less strokes, the less time I have to hit that paper with my brush, the better. So I want to make sure that I get things on there fairly efficiently. And I'm going to put just a little bit of some darker on the edges. I kind of like that. It wants to kind of frame it almost. And then because we can, we're going to dip the corner of the brush into that Quinacridone Rose and just give that a little introduction to the page. Bringing that all the way down to the bottom. And I think what we'll do is, this will be just for simplicity purposes today, let's just make that a lake. This will be our horizon, sunrise, sunset. I'm going to go with my damp paper towel. I don't want it dripping wet. I want it just damp, and I want to make a little marshmallowy pillow with it. And I want to hold it back away from this top edge, because when I'm dabbing for my clouds, I don't want to be hitting my fingers onto the surface of the page. Okay, so I'm just going to go in and create some fluffiness. And if you turn this little bit of paper, you can get those shapes looking a little bit different. While this is still damp, it's going to continue to move, and those colors will soften and blend. I've got a bit of a glare from the light there. I can't really see what I'm doing, but that's never stopped me before, right? All right. And with my clouds, I mean, I look at clouds all the time and I observe them, and sometimes I think, gosh, if I tried to paint that, no one would believe me. So I like to keep things sort of looking a little bit natural and random and uneven. And the other day I saw a cloud that looked like a great big spaceship. It was just the weirdest shape hovering over our city. But these clouds are just they're kind of soft and floaty. I'm going to set my big Hake brush aside, and I'm going to go in with I believe it's 1 inch. Here, let's remove all doubt. Yes, that's a 1 inch. And this one is, they all look about the same. Yeah, maybe 1.5. So I'm going to go try the 1 inch. Now I want to, because my paints are starting to dry out a tiny bit, I really love to have the surface of my paints glistening. I like to know that there's enough water on the surface that they've woken up those paints, just so that I don't have to dig around. I don't have to fish for getting color on my brush. I can just touch, and I've got enough pigment to take me where I need to go. So I'm going to create, I think, just some treetops and things happening along here. So, oh, that was very sticky. But But you can see, even though there's a lot of real estate on the end of this brush, if I use it on its side, I can create tree shapes, bush shapes, mountain shapes if I, wanted to do that. And this is Mayan Dark Blue. Now that's fairly thick from my brush, but it will lighten up, and because the paper is still a bit dampish, it might soften a bit on the edges, which will be kind of lovely. And these will become sort of a nice bit of background, and then we can go in on the front of that and create. Stuck my hand in my paint. We can create more colors on the front of that. So there's a nice little outcropping of land. And then this time we'll go on this side. I always like to keep things a bit uneven. And as you noticed, I didn't put this outcropping of land dead center. I try to avoid that. Sometimes I get carried away and I get things more dead center. But as always, the rule of thirds, if you take your page and divide it into 3 this way and 3 this way, your focal points, if you can hit on those places where those lines intersect, that's always a good thing. So, maybe we'll put a little bright colored tree there at some point. And let's make this little land bit down a little further. And with these brushes, if you can see how I'm sort of doing a back and forth in the mixing well of my palette, you can see where there's a bit of a straighter line, so that can help with making those lines with your brush. I just want to make sure that I've got enough moisture. There we go. That's what we want to see. I'm going to put a couple little higher ones over there. And let's bring this. So similar, I think, perhaps to acrylic painting, where you kind of want to get some background color in there. I had a chance to play with some acrylic paints, which isn't my usual thing, but at one of my paint groups that I went to, they did a little demo and we all got to play around with doing acrylics, and that was a whole beautiful exercise as well. Yeah, I kind of like how that's going. I think what I'll do here, just this kind of looks to me like it might be a little bit of rocky embankment. So where the brush is sort of touched paint out into that lake area, those will be little wisps of shrubbery or whatever, and we'll make that more evident later, perhaps. All right, so now things are still kind of dampish. I like to go in, and again, it's we don't have the heat on anymore here in the Okanagan, but it does tend to dry things fairly quickly. I'm just going to tap in to the wetness. It's still not quite where I'd like to see it. There we go. That's what I want. I want fairly wet on my brush, and I'm just going to go kind of randomly with the green over top of those blue areas with this beautiful Hake brush. And some of them, some of the spots will go up and above what we have there. And again on this side, we'll put a couple of green bits there. And always where I would do my rocks, I like to include the colors that are in my painting. This is kind of fun where it was still quite damp, so the pigment is sort of bleeding down into that wetness, and here as well. So that's going to give me my natural reflection. I don't have to go in and create a reflection of any sort, and this side as well. So I'm getting that green in there, and we'll give our brush a good clean. And to brighten things up, as always, my beautiful Quinacridone Gold. Just one little dab in to my paint every now and then. Whoops, and I somehow have a hair on there. That's going to give me an interesting little shadow or glint into my water area. So fairly wet, but the Quinacridone Gold is going to, as always, push away those other pigments. Okay. If I take my dampish paper towel, just make sure that it's all nice and damp. I do prefer the dampness of the paper towel. Sometimes the dry bits can be angular and crinkly and not always great. And I just want to lay that on top. I'm not going to put any pressure. I'm just letting the weight of the paper towel, the damp paper towel, just touch the surface of what's there, and it's going to pick up some of that excess. And sometimes it pulls away enough that it gives you a bit of an indication of where there might be some lightness and some shadow and some highlights happening. Okay. Then I can see I've got a bit of a hair or something on there. And if I just go randomly with the paper towel, similar to the clouds, and just pull away some of that pigment, you get natural sort of light and dark places that look quite gorgeous and give you that effect that the trees are at a different level happening in there. Now, while things are still dampish on these little rocky outcropped areas, I'm going to take my trusty plastic tab. If you've used a credit card and cut it down, try to remember to somehow round those edges a little bit. I just use the tabs off of a plastic bag, and I'm going to turn this just so I don't get my hand in the wet part of the paper. And we just want to trying to get the rocks with different shapes. You don't want them all to look like the same thing. And there we have, I think, a pretty good indication there. Oops, nothing really specific, but we've got, so I lied. It wasn't just a Hake brush, it was a piece of plastic as well. But there is, there is a nice little landscape. These little blooms that have happened here, I'm going to keep an eye on those just because I indicated, or I added more water, and the background that had been painted there was at a different level of wetness. So when you do that, when you add more water to an area that's not quite the same consistency or level of wetness, you do get a bloom because the water wants to move around and push around. But here again, a little bloom here. If they look like they're going to become an issue and become too much of a hard edge, I will take a dry brush and just sort of approach that lightly. I'm barely touching the surface, but what I want to do is if there's any water sitting on the edge of where that bloom has happened and it's stopped moving, but there's still a bit of moisture there, if I do this, I can soften that edge so it looks like I meant to put a shrub there or a bush, right? And then we'll turn it around and we'll do the same thing this way. We're just going to soften those edges, and I'm barely touching. If you have to go over it 10 times, I think it's worth doing that rather than going in hard, because when you touch your page, you're likely to leave a mark. So just soften those edges. If you can, and down here where it's fallen into the water area, again I would do the same thing just to keep any really loose edges from happening. Yes, I got a bit of the Quinacridone Gold there. Let's see if we can do a quick, I'm just going to grab this because it's handy. I want something with more of a stiff a stiff bristle on it, just, and I'm not going to be able to do that. Okay, well, that's fine. Light as possible. And I guess we should put some kind of a horizon line. So the brush is just damp, and even that little tiny bit of dampness will pick up what's on the surface and adjust it slightly. So if I touch where this paint is, I can drag just a tiny bit of that color across. That's all I need to indicate that there's a horizon line back there. And then, if you wanted to, you could go in and fine-tune some of the edges. See where I've got my horizon doing this. That's a challenge for me always. Get a ruler out, I guess, and measure where I want my horizon. But yeah, there's my quick Hake painting. I'd be happy to leave it like that. I love to leave a lot to the imagination. You could always go in with a little one of the little bright brushes and remove some of the shorelines. Perhaps I might do that later. If I do, I'll post a picture of it, or I'll get Lorenz to add a picture of that as well to the end. But yeah, plain and simple Hake brushes. You don't need to use anything else but one of those, really. And I think that the pigments like those brushes. I think the water likes those brushes, and they make a good team for what I like to paint. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for joining me today, accomplices. I really had fun showing you how I like to use Hake brushes. I hope you get a chance to try them. If you like what you've seen, I invite you to subscribe to my channel, visit my website, or head on over to the members area.